What if the things you have been told make you too much are actually proof of something exceptional? Continue with me, because by the conclusion of this video, you will grasp why Carl Jung suggested that the very characteristic society finds fault with could be the key to unlocking your most profound purpose. Carl Jung famously stated, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what happens if the person you truly are doesn't conform to the standard? What if your passion, your heightened sensitivity, and your unwillingness to settle for superficial answers are not defects needing correction, but indicators of a scarce and potent psychological makeup? If you have consistently felt like a stranger in your own existence, if you've been described as too intense or overly complicated, this is no accident. Based on Carl Jung's revolutionary work on personality types, certain people have what he termed a differentiated consciousness, a method of perceiving reality that the majority of individuals never attain. Here is the fascinating part. Jung found that these uncommon personalities frequently spend their whole lives believing something is defective about them, when they are, in fact, functioning at a level of psychological complexity that is truly rare. However, there is a complication, which I will disclose in a moment. Today, we are delving into 8 distinct indicators that you have this unique personality type. If you see yourself in these descriptions, it will not only alter your perspective on your past, but could also revolutionize your entire future. But first, a question for you. Have you ever felt that your emotional responses seem out of proportion compared to those of others? There is a psychological basis for this that Jung brought to light, and it's not what you might assume. Sign 1. You experience an emotional depth that others find incomprehensible. Carl Jung unearthed something extraordinary regarding emotional intensity. He determined that specific individuals do not merely feel emotions. They encounter what he referred to as affect-toned complexes, which generate a deep psychological resonance. To put it more simply, you don't just possess feelings. Feelings surge through you like powerful ocean currents, both deep and transformative. Here is what Jung grasped that is often overlooked. This is not a sign of emotional instability. It is emotional sophistication. So why does society attempt to persuade you of the opposite? When you feel things with great depth, you are not overreacting. You are tapping into layers of psychological experience that most have been conditioned to repress. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Your emotional intensity is not a liability. It is a kind of psychological radar that senses what others fail to perceive. You register the unsaid tensions in a room. You detect when a person's smile is incongruent with their eyes. You absorb the emotional undercurrents of every situation because your psyche is designed for depth, not for superficial courtesies. But this is where it becomes compelling, and where many with this trait make a crucial error that holds them back. Jung pinpointed a distinct pattern in how emotionally deep individuals undermine their own gift. Society encourages you to diminish your feelings, to be more logical, to cease making things so dramatic. Yet, Jung knew that when you stifle this emotional depth, you do not become normal. You become neurotic. You begin to suffer from what he called psychological splitting, where one part of you recognizes the truth, while another attempts to fit in. This explains why you've likely felt depleted from trying to be someone you aren't. But imagine if I revealed that Jung found a method to convert this emotional intensity from a heavy weight into your most significant asset. I will share that method under sign number 6. Sign 2. You question everything. You challenge everything with persistent curiosity. As Carl Jung noted, Most individuals lead what he termed unconscious lives. They embrace societal norms without question. You, however, cannot stop yourself from probing more deeply. Jung would have identified you as a person with an engaged thinking function that dismisses surface-level answers. This part is critical. Jung found that those who question everything are not trying to be contrary. They are being psychologically authentic. However, this authenticity has a hidden price that most fail to see until it is too late. You don't just inquire what, you inquire why. Why do individuals remain in relationships that cause them pain? Why do we tolerate systems that fail to serve our best interests? Why do we act as though shallow interactions constitute a meaningful bond? Your mind is in a constant search for the truth that lies beneath the surface. Jung labeled this the transcendent function, the mental capacity to envision beyond existing constraints. While some embrace the status quo, you are already imagining how things could be different, superior, or more genuine. But here lies the paradox Jung pointed out. The more distinctly you perceive reality, the more you risk feeling isolated. Why? Because your inquiries endanger the comfortable falsehoods of others. When you pose profound questions, you are not merely looking for information. You are challenging the psychological barriers that help people feel secure within their own limitations. This is likely why you have been labeled as cynical or pessimistic, when in truth, you are being bravely honest. Jung discovered something intriguing about people like you. You possess what he described as prophetic consciousness. You perceive where events are headed long before anyone else. This ability carries a specific responsibility that I will outline in the final sign, and it may be unexpected. Sign 3. You've developed fierce independence as psychological survival. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You have learned to do just that, not as a matter of preference, but out of necessity. According to Jung's work, individuals with rare personalities frequently develop what he termed individuated consciousness sooner than most, typically as a result of hardship. Here is what Jung knew that many therapists overlook. Your independence is not a defense mechanism, it is an accomplishment. Yet, society will try to frame it as a flaw. And this is why that perception is perilous. You have discovered through difficult lessons that relying on others for your self-esteem is like standing on psychological quicksand. So you built your own foundation. You stood on your own, frequently alone, and forged an identity that could not be stripped away by another's judgment or departure. Jung named this journey individuation, the psychological process of moving toward wholeness. The majority of people never finish this journey, as it demands confronting what Jung called the shadow, all the aspects of yourself you were taught to disown. But this is where things become intricate. Your independence both draws in people who wish to control it and pushes away those who are intimidated by it. Jung pinpointed a distinct pattern in how independent personalities handle relationships, and grasping this pattern can change your entire approach. You have no need for someone to make you whole because you have performed the psychological labor of becoming whole yourself. This means you do not enter relationships out of neediness. You enter them by choice. You are not looking for a savior. You are looking for a partner to stand beside you as you both evolve. Jung found something profound about those who attain genuine independence. They become magnets for both true love and manipulative personalities. The skill lies in distinguishing between the two. And I will reveal Jung's technique for this in sign number 7. Your solitude is not loneliness. It is a sanctuary. It is the space where you reconnect with who you are beneath the various roles and expectations. And that is self-knowledge. You possess intuitive awareness, Jung stated it is the bedrock of all psychological well-being. Sign 4. You possess intuitive awareness that borders on psychic. Carl Jung transformed psychology by recognizing intuition as a valid psychological function. He explained, intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, ways out of a blocked situation by a process that is mostly unconscious. Here's a discovery by Jung that science is just now confirming. The nervous systems of some individuals are wired to detect information that most people miss. Yet this ability comes with a weight that can damage relationships if you fail to learn how to handle it. You don't simply watch people, you perceive their psychological state. You see the subtle facial expressions, the changes in energy, and the unspoken words. Jung would have seen this as proof of what he called active imagination, the capacity to perceive what is not immediately apparent. When a person claims to be fine, yet their body language signals deep distress, you cannot ignore it. When there is a palpable tension in a space that everyone else disregards, you feel it viscerally. This is not paranoia. It is psychological sensitivity functioning at a high capacity. But here is Jung's caution. If you fail to learn how to shield this sensitivity, it will deplete you. He identified a particular method that enables intuitive individuals to preserve their awareness without absorbing the psychological turmoil of others. According to Jung, those with a strong intuitive function often become unwitting therapists. They find themselves performing emotional labor for those around them. You find yourself managing conversations, calming tensions, and bearing unspoken sorrows because you cannot help but sense them. Jung made a surprising discovery about intuitive personalities. They frequently lose their sense of self in the course of understanding others. There is a particular psychological pitfall that ensnares nearly everyone with this characteristic, and understanding it is vital for your health. The risk is that you grow so adept at interpreting others that you neglect to check in with your own inner state. You become externally oriented, perpetually scanning for emotional cues, while your own needs remain unaddressed and unspoken. However, when Jung collaborated with highly intuitive people, he found they could change this sensitivity from a liability into a strength. The solution is in grasping what he called psychological boundaries, and I will disclose this technique shortly. Sign 5. You crave meaning over social acceptance. Carl Jung noted, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if being authentic to yourself requires you to reject all that society instructs you to desire? Jung found that some personalities are psychologically unable to lead in authentic existences. Here is what Jung understood about individuals like you. You do not simply prefer meaning over popularity. Your very psyche insists upon it. This, however, generates a specific form of psychological struggle that can be crushing if you fail to comprehend the underlying dynamics. You have likely made attempts to live for external approval. Perhaps you adhered to the conventional path, said what was expected, and assumed the anticipated role. But Jung would have noticed the signs instantly. That persistent feeling of emptiness, that sense of having betrayed a core part of yourself, that silent despair hidden beneath the praise. According to Jung, when you live in a way that contradicts your psychological type, you don't merely feel uneasy. You start to show what he termed neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally revolts against a lack of authenticity. Jung made a sobering discovery. Most individuals never find true meaning because they are too fearful of social disapproval. But people like you encounter a different kind of trial, one that is both more difficult and ultimately more fulfilling. You cannot feign interest in superficial objectives. You are unable to feel enthusiastic about accomplishments that are devoid of real substance. You cannot form relationships built on convenience instead of genuine connection. Your psychological constitution forbids it. This is why you have probably felt like an outsider in your own society. But Jung identified something extraordinary about those who make meaning a priority. They act as evolutionary catalysts for the collective human consciousness. When you decline to accept anything less than an authentic bond, you compel others to examine their own lack of authenticity. When you pose the questions that others shy away from, you open up a space for truth. When you live based on your values instead of your anxieties, you empower others to do the same. But here is Jung's most critical insight regarding meaning-driven personalities. You bear a psychological duty that extends beyond your own fulfillment. I will disclose this duty in the final sign, and it may alter your view of your entire life's purpose. Sign 6. You've overgrown. You've outgrown people and environments that once fit. Carl Jung stated, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." But what occurs when you decline to lead an unlived life? What occurs when you grow past the psychological confines of your surroundings? Jung uncovered something profound about psychological development. It is frequently a solitary path, but a specific form of grief accompanies this evolution, and recognizing this grief is essential for your ongoing growth. You have probably felt the painful awareness that people who once understood you no longer do. This is not because you have grown difficult or arrogant, but because you have cast off layers of conditioning that are no longer useful to you. Jung referred to this as a process of psychological death and rebirth. Here is what is often misunderstood about outgrowing relationships. It is not a decision you make. It is a result of becoming your authentic self. Yet, Jung identified a method for navigating this change that respects both your development and your former connections. The friends who were familiar with you when you were diminishing yourself, when you were a people pleaser, when you were hiding your truth, they recall that version of you, and at times they wish for that version to return because it seemed more secure, more predictable, and simpler to comprehend. But you are unable to go back. Jung knew that psychological growth is an irreversible process. Once you have peeked behind the veil of social norms, once you have experienced genuine living, you cannot go back to a state of unconscious conformity. Jung made a striking observation about individuals who outgrow their settings. They frequently go through what he termed the dark night of the soul, a time of deep loneliness that challenges their dedication to authenticity. This is not a common loneliness. It is an existential isolation, the awareness that your journey is singular, your viewpoint is uncommon, and your growth may require leaving behind all that is familiar. Yet Jung found something beautiful about those who successfully navigate this change. They begin to attract relationships of remarkable depth and genuineness. The key is to understand his idea of psychological resonance, how authentic individuals find one another. When you cease to perform and begin to exist, when you cease to shrink and begin to expand, when you cease to apologize for your depth and begin to claim it, a shift occurs in your entire relational dynamic. Sign 7. You offer profound presence in a distracted world. According to Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what if you are the kind of individual who brings about transformation just by being authentically present? Jung identified a scarce attribute that certain people have: the capacity to provide what he termed a psychological holding space. If you possess this ability, you are already aware of its cost, but you may not grasp how uncommon and precious it truly is. When someone is in conversation with you, they feel perceived in a way that is rare. You do not simply hear their words. You sense their underlying emotional condition. You do not provide easy answers. You provide deep witnessing. You do not rush to pass judgment. You allow space for truth to come forward. Jung knew that this degree of presence is, in fact, a kind of psychological healing. When in your presence, people reconnect with what it's like to be human, complex, contradictory, and deserving of being understood. But here is Jung's vital insight. Individuals with this ability frequently deplete themselves by offering it too generously. He pointed out specific psychological boundaries that permit empathetic individuals to preserve their depth without becoming drained. You have likely been cast in the role of the informal therapist, the emotional stabilizer, or the safe haven for others. While this makes you immensely valuable, it can also render you invisible. You grow so adept at holding space for others that you neglect to request that space be held for you. Jung found something significant about highly empathetic personalities. They often fall into what he called helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-neglect that ultimately benefits no one. The objective is not to stop caring or to shut down your heart. The objective is to cultivate discernment, to recognize who is worthy of access to your emotional presence and who has demonstrated the capacity for reciprocity. When Jung worked with individuals who had a natural therapeutic presence, he found they had to master a particular skill that completely altered their relationships. I will discuss this skill in the final sign, as it is crucial for preserving your gifts without losing your sense of self. Sign 8. You sense a larger purpose. You perceive a greater purpose that remains just beyond your grasp. Carl Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside? Dreams. Who looks inside awakens." If you have experienced a persistent feeling that you are destined for something beyond the conventional, Jung would have identified this as what he called the transcendent function, your psyche's impulse toward individuation and meaning. Here is what Jung discovered about individuals with an undefined yet pressing sense of purpose. They are not suffering from delusions or grandiosity. They are heeding what he termed an archetypal calling. However, there is a specific way this calling can be misconstrued, and grasping this is essential. You have sensed it. That unquiet certainty that you have a contribution to make, something to create, a message to share. It may not be fully formed yet, but its presence is undeniable. Jung interpreted this as proof of what he called creative potential demanding expression. This is not about achieving fame or public acclaim. It is about finding alignment, the psychological need to live in sync with your truest self. Jung determined that individuals who disregard this call often manifest what he described as neurotic symptoms. These can include anxiety, depression, and a feeling of purposelessness. But here is Jung's most profound insight regarding purpose-driven personalities. Your calling is not merely personal, it is transpersonal. You are not only here for your own fulfillment, you are here to contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung held that individuals with rare personalities act as conduits between the unconscious and conscious aspects of the human experience. Through your depth, your inquiries, and your refusal to accept superficiality, you facilitate humanity's growth. This is the reason You cannot be content with the ordinary. This is the reason surface-level interactions feel hollow. This is the reason you prefer solitude over pretense. Your psyche is aware that you have a job to do, and that job demands authenticity, depth, and bravery. However, Jung also cautioned against the inflation that can arise from acknowledging your purpose. The challenge is to embody both humility and strength, recognizing that you are unique without considering yourself superior. Carl Jung dedicated his entire career to understanding personalities like yours. He referred to people with these characteristics as the differentiated individuals who have cultivated a psychological complexity that enables them to perceive, feel, and comprehend on levels that most people never access. If even half of these indicators resonated with you, you are not simply different. You are part of what Jung described as the leading edge of human consciousness. You are among the individuals guiding our species toward greater awareness, more profound truth, and more authentic connection. Yes, it can be lonely at times. Yes, you will be misunderstood. Yes, it demands more courage than most will ever have to summon. But Jung was convinced that people like you are vital to humanity's psychological advancement. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a superpower. Your intensity is not too much. It is precisely what is needed in the world. Your refusal to compromise is not being difficult. It is being courageous. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You are in the process of doing just that, and by doing so, you are granting others the permission to do the same. Leave a comment below to let me know which of these signs resonated most with you. Share this with someone who could use a reminder of their own psychological uniqueness. And subscribe, because our exploration into the depths of what makes you exceptional has only just begun. Remember, you are not too much. The world is too little. And Jung knew that people like you are the ones who can change that.